Good morning, everyone. We will get started with today's webinar in just a few minutes. We are waiting on a few people to join. Please stand by. Good morning, everyone. We will get started with today's webinar in just a few minutes. We are waiting on a few more people to join. Please stand by. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Heather Hudson, your moderator for today's webinar, Optimize Your Security Program with ThreadFix 2.7, Application Risk Management and On-Demand AppSec Assessments. You may send in questions at any time during the presentation via the question and answer chat feature. We will collect these and address them at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Dan Cornell, a globally recognized application security expert who holds over 15 years of experience architecting, developing, and securing web-based software systems. As Chief Technology Officer and Principal at Denim Group, he leads the technology team to help Fortune 500 companies and government organizations integrate security throughout the development process.
Thanks, Heather. And thank all of you today for coming online to talk with us about what we've done with ThreadFix 2.7. I'm afraid I have to start today out with a little bit of bad news. Kyle Pippin, the ThreadFix product manager, was supposed to be on this webinar with me. He unfortunately had a conflict come up and won't be able to attend. So if you were calling in to hear from Kyle, I'm sorry. You'll have to track him down at some other time, but hopefully I can fill his shoes. So again, thanks to everybody for coming out here today. And today I want to talk about some of the things that we've done with ThreadFix 2.7, and I'll provide an overview of the ThreadFix platform, and then talk about the new things that we've added with the 2.7 release. And as an added bonus, I'll tease some of the things that we have coming out with the ThreadFix 3.0 release in Q1 of 2019. So as we get started here, again, I just want to provide an overview to folks who may be on this webinar but don't necessarily have a strong background in the ThreadFix platform. With the ThreadFix platform, it lets you run application security programs. And so it lets you consolidate the results of all the different testing activities that you're doing as part of your application security program. It lets you manage those vulnerabilities via two-way integration with defect tracking tools that development teams are using. And because all of this is being done in a centralized platform, it provides access to very powerful analytics. And those analytics really put you in a situation where you can start to take a much more quantitative view of your application security program, because you can know where you are, you can benchmark what you're doing versus other organizations, you can run experiments, ask questions, and have data that actually answers these. And we found that that is something that provides a much better ability for organizations to drive maturity in their programs when they can take that quantitative view. So, what we've seen is every ThreadFix deployment that we've seen has an architecture diagram that looks very similar to this. On the left side of the equation is you have the inputs, right? So in ThreadFix, in the middle, you've got laid out, here's all the teams we have around the world developing software and systems. And here are all the applications that these folks are responsible for. And you can also collect metadata about the applications. Again, on the left side of the equation, you have the inputs, which are the results of all the different testing activities that are going on. Those get fed essentially into ThreadFix. ThreadFix normalizes and deduplicates that information, and then it's sent out to consumers on the other side. A big part of that, again, is reporting and analytics, also communicating with the development teams and the tools they're already using. And finally, communicating up to the governance and compliance functions in organizations. And doing all that, again, in a centralized platform to give you a holistic view of everything going on in your application security or in your software assurance program. So let's look at what that looks like. When we talk about consolidating test results, what we found with ThreadFix is even moderately sophisticated application security programs are multi-activity and multi-vendor. And the reason for that is that one type of analysis isn't going to provide you all of the security insight to your applications that you need. And so you have, most programs we look at have a combination of different application security testing tools, so static analysis tools, looking at source code or looking at binaries, dynamic application security testing tools, fuzzing, typically web applications, and interactive application security testing tools, where you have an agent embedded in the application as it runs, looking for vulnerabilities as the application is executed. We've also seen tremendous uptake in the past couple years of software composition analysis. And so that's looking at tools like a Black Duck or a Sonatype, where they're looking at the open source components that are included in your application software and notifying you when you're using components that have known vulnerabilities. So in addition to this type of automated testing, or these different classes of automated analysis that are going on, comprehensive programs are also doing manual testing. So there's manual code review going on, potentially manual application assessments or penetration tests going on. And organizations are also using external third parties to do testing. And so all of these testing activities are components of an overall application security program, or components of an overall software assurance program. And so what ThreadFix lets you do is it lets you first lay out your application portfolio. So as I mentioned before, here are all the teams we have worldwide that are developing software, as well as the applications that each team is responsible for. And it lets you collect metadata about these applications as well. So is this application written in Java, or is this written in .NET? Is this a mobile application? Is this a web application? Or are these some web services? In addition, you can track compliance information. Does this application manage data that would make it subject to PCI? Does this application have data in it that makes it a concern for GDPR? And so it allows you in ThreadFix to create this comprehensive application portfolio with the metadata that you need later on to help drive risk management decisions, where you're going to ask the question, with the limited remediation resources I have, which are the vulnerabilities that are most critical for me to fix? Because those are the ones that are going to address the most serious risks we have. And so the foundation of this is having your application portfolio enumerated. From there, you load in the results of all the different testing. And so as I talked about before, the automated scanning you're doing, if you're doing static testing with a Fortify or a check marks, if you're doing dynamic testing with a Web Inspect or an AppScan, if you're doing IAST with Contrast, and if you're using external service providers, so a Veracode or a White Hat, IBM AppScan Enterprise, so on and so forth. And so pulling in all of that data, along with your software composition analysis data, along with the results of all of the manual activities that you have going on in third-party testing. So all of these test results get loaded into ThreadFix. And ThreadFix normalizes and deduplicates this test data. And so the value in that process, of that normalization and deduplication, is that we typically see a 15 to 35% reduction in the finding count. And the value there is, it means that your security analysts have less findings to go through. So as you do this analysis that is looking at the application from different angles, pulling all that data into one central place, by normalizing and deduplicating those results, that provides your security analysts with a smaller set of results that they need. And in situations where we've been able to combine results, identifying, hey, these are different pieces of information but about the same vulnerability, that analyst has a richer set of information that they can use to make triage decisions. Is this a false positive or is this a true positive? And as we announced a couple weeks ago, this includes some technology that we developed, we call hybrid analysis mapping, that allows us to correlate between static application security testing and dynamic application security testing. And we can do that without having to run an actual agent. So we're really excited. This was based on some work that was funded by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate Cybersecurity Division, under their Small Business Innovation Research Program, or SBIR. So that's a lot of acronyms, but they were, we really enjoyed working with them to develop that technology, and we're thrilled that that has resulted in the grant of 2 patents that came out just a month or so ago. And again, the value of this technology is in that reduction of finding count, so that your security analysts have less to do when they look at triaging the vulnerabilities that are coming into the system. From there, you need to manage these vulnerabilities. And the first thing to do is vulnerability prioritization. I don't know a lot of, or actually I know 0 application security teams where they feel they have not enough work to do, or they feel like they're overstaffed. And so, and I've also never seen an organization that feels like they had a surplus of resources for remediation. The sad fact of affairs, the sad state of affairs is there are going to be vulnerabilities that you identify in your software that you're never going to get fixed. And so with ThreadFix, it helps you prioritize these vulnerabilities that you have, so you can identify the subset of those vulnerabilities that you're going to address with the limited resources that you have for remediation. So ThreadFix lets you slice and dice to identify, for a given application, which are the vulnerabilities that we consider to be the most serious. And also you're taking into account compliance impacts, looking and saying, well, we track a lot of sensitive personal information in this application. We track credit card information in this application. Maybe that's going to make you look and say, we need to make sure we have no SQL injection vulnerabilities because we cannot have anybody getting access to this data. Same looking at authorization vulnerabilities and things of that nature. And so ThreadFix allows you to slice and dice the data about your vulnerabilities in a specific application, or as we'll see, looking across your portfolio, so that you can zero in on the vulnerabilities that you consider to be the most serious. We also have a technology we call HotSpot embedded in ThreadFix, and what that does is it identifies code that is developed internal to your organization and then shared between teams, and situations where that code is responsible for vulnerabilities making their way or spreading throughout your enterprise. And so if you think about the way that a Sonatype or a Black Duck identifies you're using this open source component, and this open source component has known vulnerabilities, what ThreadFix's HotSpot technology does is it identifies those situations, but where you're dealing with internally developed code, where you have teams that are developing code inside of your enterprise and sharing that code with other teams in the organization. And so the vulnerabilities introduced by the first team then show up in the applications being managed and maintained by other teams. This is also, we actually had a patent granted on this at the end of October. So we're really excited to see the investment that we've made in technology development making its way through the system and, again, being embedded inside of ThreadFix. And the value to the organization of this HotSpot technology is it can help you identify situations where you have remediation leverage, where you can identify and say, if I can fix this vulnerability in this team's code, then I just need to work with that team to get that code spread downstream to the other consumers inside of the enterprise. And for the cost of fixing one vulnerability plus the cost of pushing this downstream, I fix 10 vulnerabilities or 20 vulnerabilities. And so by understanding a little bit better how code makes its way around your organization and how that impacts your security posture, that can feed into the remediation decisions that you're making. Next, we have the bidirectional defect tracker integration. One of the worst sins that we've seen from application security teams is trying to communicate with development teams via PDFs or via Excel spreadsheets. I've got bad news for security teams. Developers don't speak PDF and they don't speak Excel. That's not the way that they manage their workload. And probably the most powerful paradigm that we've seen application security teams adopt is that they need to take the vulnerabilities they've identified that the security team cares about, and they need to transition those to being software defects that the development teams care about. And more importantly, those defects need to live in the systems that developers are using to manage their backlog and to manage their workload. This is a very powerful approach because what it does is it recognizes for the development team, hey, developers, we expect you probably care about security, but we know that you also have to care about new features that were promised to a hotshot VP for an important customer. And you care about security, but you also have to care about non-security related bugs that are impacting a customer's experience of the software. And you care about security, but you also care about performance problems and the myriad other situations, all the other work that the development teams need to do. And so to come to a development team with respect and say, we're going to communicate with you in the tools that you're already using so you can take advantage of the investment that you've made procuring, configuring, and deploying these tools, so that you can take advantage of the meeting tempo and the process that these development teams have in place to manage their workload. Doing that sends a very powerful message to the development team, and more importantly, it takes friction out of the remediation process. And we've seen reductions in the mean time to fix for vulnerabilities of up to 44% based on the adoption of this approach. As I said, this defect tracker integration is two-way, and so as the developers mark bugs as being fixed or vulnerabilities as being fixed, that data flows back into ThreadFix so that your security analyst can go in and identify, here are the vulnerabilities that I need to retest to make sure that the development teams were successful with the fixes they implemented. And it also lets you identify automatically, here are the development teams that are being successful with remediation, and here are the ones that are having problems. Here are the teams that I'm handing vulnerabilities over to. They claim that they're fixing them, but they're not. Because that's where your security analysts need to spend their time. They don't need to be chasing all the dev teams around with a clipboard asking them what they've done. Instead, they need to focus in, here are the teams that appear to be having trouble. These folks may be a candidate for additional training, for mentoring, for access to security champions, and whatever that might be. And so this bidirectional integration with defect trackers allows your security team to focus their resources where they are most needed. And finally, as you repeat this process for an application over time, and as you extend this process across the applications in your portfolio, you start to get access to a lot of really valuable data about your program. And as I mentioned earlier, what we want to do with the ThreadFix platform is put your team in a position to take a much more quantitative view of your vulnerability management program. Instead of having conversations with management about how cross-site scripting is scary, we want to put you in a situation to talk about, here is how our program stacks up against other people. Here's how the use of our tools is working. We ran this experiment and here's what we found. And so by running all of these testing and remediation activities through the central ThreadFix platform, you get access to that data. And so again, you can start to get different views into your vulnerability data. And so you can look across all the vulnerabilities that you have that you're managing, but also drill into very specific subsets. Show me how our applications in Java compare to the ones that are in .NET. Show me all the vulnerabilities that have been out there for more than 30 days, for more than 90 days. Show me the impact that these vulnerabilities might have on applications that are subject to PCI or subject to GDPR. So you can start to build these views into the data to answer questions about how effective your program is. You can also start to benchmark your program against others. So for folks that may be familiar with Vericode's State of Software Security Report, which I think they just released a new version of, White Hat Security publishes a comparable document, and I think there's some other comparable publications that are starting to come available. These organizations have looked across their customer base and have published summary data to show here is the vulnerability prevalence rate for different classes of vulnerabilities. Here is the remediation percentage. Here's the remediation timeline. And that puts you in a situation, again, to have a much more quantitative set of discussions and a much more grown-up set of discussions with management. Because you can look and see, based on this industry data, here's the performance that we're seeing, and based on what we're doing, our performance either stacks up or it doesn't. And so that lets you go to your management and say, we need more resources for remediation. We need a better mandate to fix these things because we run the risk of falling out of step with our peers. And it's not fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It is looking at publicly available data, comparing that to your program's performance, and presenting that to management for them to make a decision. You can also start to look at scanner benchmarking, to look at, in our environment, as we've operationalized these SaaS technologies or DaaS technologies or IaaS technologies, what are we getting out of the investment that we have made? So you can look to see, for a given technology, how many false positives am I seeing versus true positives? And what's the impact on my program of having to deal with those false positives? And you can look to see, overall, what technologies are finding the most vulnerabilities, but also, potentially more importantly, which technologies are finding the vulnerabilities that we care about the most. And that puts you in a situation to make quantitative decisions. If someone comes in, if management comes in and says, we're going to cut your budget by X amount, you can look across the activities and across your portfolio and make determinations to say, I'm going to not use this technology, I'm not going to renew using this technology, or maybe I need to find money from somewhere else because this particular technology is providing a lot of value. From a ThreadFix standpoint, we're not trying to promote one static analysis engine over another. We're not trying to promote IaaS over DaaS or SaaS. With ThreadFix, we want to let you see how those technologies are performing in your operational environment so you can make the right decision about how to allocate the limited resources that you have in your budget and in your environment. So that's an overview of the ThreadFix platform. Now I want to talk about some of the new things that we've done in 2.7, which we're really excited about. The first thing that we want to talk about is some changes that we've made, or a different view that we've provided into the risk ranking for your portfolio. Also talk about some capabilities with CVE filtering, some new vulnerability statuses. We've obviously made performance enhancements. That's an ongoing effort that we have as we get into larger and larger environments, adding performance enhancements. And then I'll talk about some of the things we've done with the services delivery, assessment delivery via the ThreadFix platform. And that's really something that I think is, that's the thing I'm most excited about that has come out of this development cycle. Hopefully you all are excited about it as well. One of the new view that we provided with 2.7 is a portfolio risk ranking, and that takes into account a number of factors. It looks at the quantity and the ratios of the vulnerabilities that have been identified, but it also looks at the metadata you have attached to the applications that you have in the portfolio. And so as you've identified applications that are subject to PCI, as you've identified applications that may be public-facing versus internal-facing, all of those factors are loaded in and provide a risk-ranked view into your portfolio so that you can see, across these different applications, for the applications that have the most and the most serious vulnerabilities, for the ones that are exposed to the public where those vulnerabilities are more likely to be exploited, as well as looking at the assessment activity. And so where are applications where we haven't done assessments in a long time, and so our view into the state of security for that system is potentially out of date. And so by doing that, that can help you focus your efforts to identify, these are the applications that I need to prioritize for testing. These are the vulnerabilities that I need to prioritize for remediation, because addressing these are going to be the ones that help us better reduce our risk posture. And so, again, looking at, as organizations develop their programs, as they start to look at new technologies, look at new techniques, being able to focus limited resources in the most impactful areas is really critical, and the new portfolio view provides for that type of approach, that type of a view into your application security program, again, so that you can focus limited resources where they're going to have the most impact. Also provided some additional views via CVE filtering. As I mentioned earlier, the surge in organizations that are deploying these software composition analysis tools has been pretty significant in the last couple of years, and that's because you've seen breaches due to things like struts vulnerabilities and things of that nature. And so for quite some time, we've allowed you to pull the software composition analysis data into ThreadFix, and now we've improved our reporting on that. So you can look across your entire portfolio and say, hey, we just found out that there is an automated exploit out there for the most recent struts or spring vulnerability. Show me all the systems or all the applications that I have that are potentially subject to that, and let's potentially bump those up to the top of the list. In addition, we've added some new vulnerability statuses. This is a little bit of a housekeeping thing, but it allows you to be much more, to communicate about the vulnerabilities in a much richer way. We've always had open, close, and false positive, but also being able to tag vulnerabilities as being exploitable, or situations where those vulnerabilities are contested and when they've been verified. This gives you a better ability to filter on vulnerabilities and to tease out which are the ones where we need to be focusing our attention. Finally, the most interesting thing, or the most important thing that we've done with 2.7 is we've integrated Denim Group's professional and managed services capabilities directly into the ThreadFix platform. And what we want to do is allow organizations to make both strategic and tactical decisions about how they run their program. And what I mean by that is this. From a strategic standpoint, security managers running application security programs need to make a determination. These are the skill sets I want to have in-house. Right? These are the things that I want my team to be able to do. And these are other skill sets that I don't necessarily view as strategic, or that I don't want to have in-house. And so on the one side, we're looking at what capabilities do you want to have in your program, and what capabilities do you want to outsource. So we've had conversations, leading up to this, we've had conversations with organizations where they've said, for example, we have a volume of web applications, so it makes sense for us to license web application testing technology, to manage an internal red team to look at our web applications. but they've said to us, but when it comes to mobile applications, we don't have the volume of applications that would justify that same approach. And we don't want to maintain that capability because we believe in the mobile space or in the IoT space. Again, we don't have the quantity of applications and we don't have enough of a critical mass of these to develop that skill set. We just want to peel off all of our mobile and IoT testing and outsource that, and we're going to keep our web application testing function internal. Makes a lot of sense. We've also talked to organizations where they've said, hey, testing is the easiest thing for us to outsource. We just want to turn that over to you all, and we're going to use the full-time equivalents that we have internally. We're going to use our internal people to do threat modeling and to do, to help with our DevSecOps rollout, because those are the people in the organization that have the relationships that are in a better position to drive those initiatives. I don't want to take up their time doing testing. We're just going to turn that over. And so, again, looking from a capability standpoint, what ThreadFix 2.7 lets you do is to make a determination. What capabilities do I want to have internally? What capabilities do I want to outsource? And you have access to that all from the centralized platform. Similarly, this gives you the ability to make decisions about capacity. And we talk to organizations where they've said, hey, we need to get 50 applications tested over the next, in the next quarter. But our internal resources are only going to be able to get to 25 of those. But if I need to hit my numbers for the coverage that we're expecting, we just want to carve off 25 of these applications and turn the testing over. We have the capacity to handle the remainder. And so what ThreadFix 2.7 lets you do is it lets you make those decisions as well. And so both from a strategic standpoint, looking at what skills you want to have in-house and what skills you don't, but also looking at having access to capacity. With ThreadFix 2.7, it allows you to make those determinations. So with ThreadFix 2.7, we're trying to put you in a situation to craft the application security program that you want. Asking questions about what am I doing now that I don't want to be doing, and what do I want to be doing in the future, and how do I make sure that all of this is seamlessly rolled up into one centralized management platform where I have the metrics where I can track the effectiveness. So with 2.7, ThreadFix allows you to access to Denim Group's quick check assessments as well as our standard assessments, both from a static analysis and from a dynamic analysis standpoint. So you can, again, make that determination to say, what workload do I want to be responsible for? What workload do I want to turn over? So again, this allows you to request these assessments from inside of the ThreadFix platform. Those service requests flow to our queue, get handed off to Denim Group, code reviewers, Denim Group application assessors, application pen testers. And then those results then flow directly back into the ThreadFix platform to live alongside all of the scanning that you're doing internally. And so, all the backdrop of scanning, of other third-party testing, the work that your internal teams is doing lives alongside the results of the things that you outsource to Denim Group. Again, providing you with this centralized view into the security of your program as a whole, and letting you make those determinations about how you want to allocate the scarce resources that you have available. I also want to talk very briefly about the ThreadFix 3.0. That's available. It's running internally as a technology preview and will be available in Q1 of next year. And what we're doing with 3.0 is extending this even further for unified vulnerability management. So ThreadFix traditionally has been very focused on application security, the management of application security vulnerabilities and running of application security programs. And so what we've done with 3.0 is we've taken a step back to look even more holistically to say, let's look at your network and infrastructure vulnerability management and how you correlate between your network and infrastructure along with the applications that are running on top of those. And so with the 3.0, we're taking a step back and looking much more broadly at vulnerability management as a whole and combining our application security expertise and our strength in application security management, expanding that to also look at network and infrastructure vulnerability management. As you also might have noticed, the user interface has been completely redone for 3.0. I remember speaking with an analyst a while back, and the analyst characterized that ThreadFix has a engineering grade user interface, which I do not believe was intended to be a compliment. So they have finally, with 3.0, they've gotten rid of the influence that I personally have had on the user interface and the user experience. and I'm a big enough person to admit that that is certainly a good thing. Also, from an architecture standpoint, we've moved with 3.0 from a more monolithic application that the ThreadFix has traditionally been to be much more microservices-based with a containerized deployment. So a much more modern architecture that allows for much easier management of ThreadFix implementations, as well as much easier ability to go in and scale different capabilities within the system. And so really excited to get that in front of folks. If that's something that you're interested in, please reach out and let us know. We're going to be working with a number of organizations with the technology to get that tuned, and it should ultimately be released in the Q1 of next year. I've got a couple references here. Obviously, the slides will be available along with a recording of this that will be mailed out to everybody, hopefully later today, or it might be tomorrow morning. Usually our marketing folks are pretty quick about that. So I've got references, obviously the ThreadFix website. We've got a blog post that talks in more detail about the specifics of the new capabilities that have come about from the 2.7 release. Also, again, some information, additional information about what's coming out with 3.0. And links to the patents that we had both on the hybrid analysis mapping technology and the HotSpot technology. And again, we're really excited to see those technologies embedded in ThreadFix and putting organizations in a situation where they can start to make better sense of the data coming out of their testing program. At this point, I'll open things up for questions. And you should be able to use, there's a Q&A feature as well as a chat feature. First question coming in is about what sort of services. So right now, what sort of services can be ordered and consumed via the ThreadFix platform? Right now, it is application testing. So you can queue up with us both static and dynamic analysis. We have assessments called quick checks that are fixed price assessments that include an automated scan, culling of false positives, as well as some time-boxed manual testing. You can also get our standard assessments that are both static and dynamic and more comprehensive. And in the future, we're going to be adding new services such as the culling of false positives. So for example, if you run a static or dynamic test, there's going to be false positives. You may not want to have your people spend time doing that. I'm more than happy to have our people spend time doing that. And so you'll be able to turn over to us either a static or a dynamic automated report and have us call out the false positive for you. And similarly, we're also looking at providing packaged remediation advice. That's something that we do on a one-off basis or on an ad hoc basis for a number of organizations, but it's also something that we've been able to streamline really well. And so right now, ThreadFix provides for access to Denim Group's testing services via the ThreadFix platform. We're going to be expanding that portfolio over time, and if folks have thoughts on the things in their program that they would like to be able to outsource, please let us know. And again, what we're doing with the ThreadFix platform is putting you in a situation where you can make a determination. If you look across all the different activities that you have that go into your program as a whole, there's some of those that you really probably want to be doing. There's others that you don't want to be doing. And so what we want to let you do is, again, be able to outsource the capability that you don't want to maintain internally, and to provide burst capacity or excess capacity that you need to make sure you get through a sufficient amount of your workload. Okay, so a question here about deploying 3.0 into a secure environment and operating it, or do we require folks to be able to connect our services and allow our teams to review the data? And so this is not just a 3.0 thing. I'll answer this for both 2.7 and 3.0. Yeah, you can still deploy ThreadFix in the manner that it has traditionally been available, where you don't have the ability to call out for services. And that's, again, for certain organizations where they, again, like the on-premise deployment model of ThreadFix, that is still available. And if you don't want any of your data. Obviously, if we're going to be doing the testing, from a remote location, we need to get access to the data to do the testing, and we work with that on the initial, kind of onboarding and setup. For organizations that don't want to have access to those capabilities or to those services, ThreadFix 2.7 and 3.0 will both be deployable in a way where it's isolated in your secure environment and none of your data comes to us. But for organizations that want to take advantage of those services to outsource testing services, obviously in those cases, we've got a switch in the license that we can turn on that sets up the crypto stuff and whatnot, and allows for the communication with us. And so, yeah, you can still deploy ThreadFix in the way that in the way that has been traditionally done. We're just offering new capabilities for organizations that want to take advantage of those. The next question about containers, so the container stuff. Obviously we have organizations that have deployed ThreadFix in containers. I think Docker is popular for 2.7 and before. For the 3.0 release, that is a set of Docker containers that make the deployment fairly straightforward, and that's one of the things we found. ThreadFix traditionally has been there have been some challenges. Admittedly, there's been some challenges maintaining the deployments over time. Just with upgrades, tend to be not as easy as they should be. With 3.0, with the containerized deployment, that makes it a lot easier because we have a container that spins up and basically looks at the state of the system and the state that it was previously in and says, oh, I need to go from 3.0.1 to 3.0.2, and goes and does all the transition and the management stuff there. So we're pretty excited about that. It's there's a lot of neat things coming out with that as well in Q1 of next year. Excellent. Any other questions from anyone, either in the chat or in the Q&A? Well, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for coming out today and taking the time to listen to me talk about this. Again, my apologies. I wish that Kyle could have been here today. He had something come up and was not able to make it, but he'll be out and about at various conferences, and if you want to track him down in person. As I said, a recording of this and the slides will be available either later today, probably realistically tomorrow morning. That should get shipped out to y'all and can be shared with colleagues who maybe were not able to make it. Appreciate everybody taking the time. Really appreciate the questions. If you have any additional questions, I'm pretty easy to track down. That's my email, Dan at Denim Group. I'm also at Daniel Cornell on Twitter if you have any questions. And if you'd like to, for trial access to ThreadFix, we've made that a little bit easier. We can actually now share, if you have, we can share an AMI, an Amazon image with you if we're given an account number and a region where you'd like to have that shared out to. We also have a pre-built virtual machine image that we can ship to download, as well as the traditional way to install. And so we've tried to make getting access to the ThreadFix platform and being able to run a proof of concept and get a feel for how it works a lot easier. So thank you all very much, and hope to be talking to some of y'all very soon. Thanks so much.